Hi, everyone. This is Andrew Cutler with a brief message about changes at the NEI podcast. Our host, Sabrina Siegel, is moving on to an exciting position in the field of TMS research, and we couldn't be happier for her. So what does that mean for NEI podcast? Well, we'll be taking a temporary hiatus over the summer. From July through September, we will revisit some of our most compelling episodes on topics that remain as relevant today as when they first aired. New episodes will resume in the fall, so make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss out. This summer, NEI Podcast is revisiting some of our most compelling episodes. In today's re-release, I interview Drs. Marko Perko and Stephen Stahl about their book Tesla, His Tremendous and Troubled Life, which explores the intersection between Tesla's genius, his creativity, and his bipolar disorder. Sadly, Dr. Marko Perko passed away last fall after a battle with cancer. He was a prolific writer and a great mind, and we re-released this episode in his honor. Welcome to another NEI podcast, and another in our series called the Psychopharmacology Show. And this one is a part 2 of a trilogy that we're doing here. And today we're going to be talking about Nikola Tesla's evil twins, genius and madness, with a very famous, prominent author, Marko Perko, who happens to be Steve Stahl's co-author on a brand new book that is actually being published, I believe, as we speak. It's coming out in a week, I believe. The book is Tesla, His Tremendous and Troubled Life. So, Marko, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And with us, as always, is Dr. Stephen Stahl. Steve, how are you today?
It's fine, yeah. I just got my books in the mail today, so that's what has been published. It's already been on Amazon. We're going to talk about it on this podcast.
Yes, I'm so excited to talk about this. Tesla is such a giant in our minds and in our society, and yet very misunderstood. So, Marko, maybe could you just tell us, why is Tesla so prominent in our imagination, and why is he so famous?
You know, when I told people that this book was coming out, a biography, people will ask, well, who's it on? And what I've been telling people is this. Up until a couple of years ago, this individual was known to very few. Today, his name is as ubiquitous as Starbucks. And as Steve and I say in the book, Tesla changed humanity for all time. Now it is his time. And that is just what has happened. I cannot think of a single individual who has done more to positively impact everyone across the globe than Nikola Tesla. And I said I wanted to begin this podcast with a question I have often been asked, because I have lectured on Tesla everywhere you can imagine. And people ask me this question. Well, how do you compare Tesla to Leonardo da Vinci, to Albert Einstein, and to Thomas Edison? And I say this, Leonardo da Vinci, he was a self-admitted kind of tinker, curiosity, all the things we think he didn't do. As an example, one of his famous drawings is of a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. I'm sure you've probably seen it. You know who holds that patent?
No.
Nikola Tesla.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, I'm not kidding. Edison was another tinker who just knocked around. In fact, a little, how should I say, vignette would be illustrative of what Tesla thought of Edison. He was often asked what he thought of Edison. And you know, they had this fierce battle.
They certainly did.
Raged for decades over alternating current versus direct current.
Exactly.
So Tesla said this, while the unschooled Thomas Edison, and he asked, why is he misunderstood? This goes to that, because every time I talk about, until recently, Tesla, you get this blowback. Oh, no, it was Edison. Edison was greater. Edison did this. When you read the biography, you realize that's not the case. He was highly overrated, but he had one quality. He had commercialism in his mind. Tesla never had commercialism. Smart.
Edison was apparently a great self-promoter, and he took a lot of credit for things that he didn't
Well,
necessarily do.
Interesting. I wrote a book a few years ago called "Did You Know That?" And one of the entries in the book was about Thomas Edison was being feted by the governor of North Carolina, and he was introduced as the greatest inventor of all time.
Wow.
No one really knows why Edison's response was the following. He said, "Well, sir, I must correct you. I am not the greatest inventor of all time. What I am is a sponge who soaks up the great inventions of others that make them commercial."
That's very honest. Actually,
no one, they figure maybe he had a little shot of scotch or something. So there's an example there.
Yeah.
Einstein had one great flash. He called it the step. We, in our book at Tesla, had it many times where we call it the boom moment. Einstein had that great year, worked hard, did a lot of things. By the way, parenthetically, as you're probably aware, his first wife did all his math because Einstein was a poor math student. His first wife was named Mileva Maric. She was a Serbian too.
Interesting.
And she bore his 3 kids. My point is, and we talk about it at the beginning of the book, if you never had the theories of relativity, if you never had the beautiful drawings of Da Vinci, if you never had the photographs supposedly credited to Edison, how would your life be different? Answer, not at all. But if you didn't have alternating current, your life would be miserable every single day.
Yes, certainly
That's
true.
the difference.
Yes.
And there's still this resistance that I've been fighting all my life when speaking about Tesla. Because you have these other names, Edison in particular, that was American, as you brought up earlier. There's something about that transition to America that people still look askance at you.
Yes, yes. So he was sort of a foreigner in America. He was a naturalized citizen, but he was not born here.
No, he was born in the Austrian Empire, 1856, although he so prized his citizenship that he only kept one thing in a bank vault in New York City. Those were his citizenship papers. Nothing else.
Wow.
No inventions, no drawings, nothing.
Wow. No money, nothing.
Well, he had those issues too. At one point,
he frittered away his money.
At one point, he was the Bill Gates and Steve Jobs of his time. He was extremely wealthy.
Yes, yes.
But people would ask him, why did you get married, have kids, live a normal life? And he said, and he believed it his whole life, he said, I am here for a different reason. I am here to lift the burdens from the shoulders of mankind.
Yeah.
So
incredible
to put a fine point on what I've been saying, that's what drove Nikola Tesla, is to lift the burdens from the shoulders of mankind at all costs. And guess what? He succeeded. And what makes it interesting, in his own time, someone did pick up his theories, his inventions, and do something with it decades later. He did it himself. That's what makes it extraordinary, is that he did it himself. Einstein would have what he called thought experiments. Tesla had thought experiments. The difference between the two was Tesla could take that thought experiment and turn it practical. He built these things, and there's pictures in the book, with his own hands. This brilliant man also would get down in the muck, so to speak.
Yeah, that is very unusual. Steve, how can we see him through the prism of mental illness? I don't want to trivialize him or reduce him to a stereotype, but how does understanding the mental illness, the bipolar, inform how we look at Tesla?
Well, it's a age-old question. What is the association of creativity, genius, with bipolar disorder? Or, if you will, in some cases, families that have bipolar disorder in them. And that's an age-old question. And Tesla probably had just about the right dose, if you will, if there is a such thing as bipolar. He wasn't overtly manic or psychotic, at least very much. He had some manic episodes, so I guess he would be diagnosed today as bipolar 1, but he mostly was hypomanic. He was charismatic. When he was up, he had energy. He was boundless, very the ability to attract to it. So that's not really a disabling part of his illness. In fact, he probably was most productive when he was somewhat hypomanic, and in later years when he was mostly depressed. This can happen in cases as the illness as a lifetime, was mostly depressed and was far less productive. He wasn't as charismatic. People didn't like his ideas as much because he wasn't as good a salesman. So
Right.
it's an interesting combination. I don't want to overstate it. I mean, it just was part of who he was. And I think the real question we try to cover in the book is, what must it have been like to have been Tesla?
Mm.
Yes.
And if you want to actually, talk about the modern day, because everybody thinks Tesla means Elon Musk. It's really amazing. Nobody, when you say, I wrote a book on Tesla, they say, oh, Elon Musk, it's Tesla, cars, but,
Yes.
and actually there's a great deal that's very similar to them. And so what must it be like to be a genius that smart, where you
Yes.
might actually have some truly off the wall, pre-psychotic or really crazy ideas that are not at all inventions, right next to an idea which is revolutionary mankind. So, here's this guy, he can't tell the difference. So
Yeah.
thank God he had more of the, revolutionizing mankind ideas than he had the ones that were in substance. But that was what it was like to be Nikola Tesla. He basically had all these maverick ideas, and it was fueled by the energy of bipolar disorder.
So, Marko, you mentioned that he was a lifelong bachelor, I understand. Didn't
Yes.
settle down. But were there people in his sphere who helped him to operationalize these ideas or to distinguish these ideas, the ones that were
Well, it wasn't so much to operationalize or distinguish ideas, because frankly, he worked kind of at a cellular level. In other words, in his shop, he would have somebody doing something, building something, whatever. He would come to them with a schematic, 1 square inch, not a big sheet, a little square inch, says you got it, look at it, then he would destroy it. He basically kept no records. Everything was in his mind. He
Wow.
didn't, if I might say this, let's go back to when Tesla was in high school. Now, unlike these other individuals that I've spoken about, including Einstein, Tesla was highly educated. He went to the finest German schools. He was also a brilliant mathematician. So he didn't require acceptance from anyone else. An early example was when he was in high school, he had a professor of electrical engineering. His name was Professor Prolsch. And Professor Prolsch was a proponent of direct current and the Graham dynamo, which he brought into the class to demonstrate. And I don't want to get too into the weeds, but it had some contrivances on it that young Tesla thought just didn't make any sense, that he thought you could do without them. So he voices his opinion in class about this.
Oh, boy.
Mind you, he's 13, 14 years old. And the professor was embarrassed and upset at the same time. So he dressed down Tesla by saying, young Mr. Tesla will do great things in his life, but he will never do this, which was taking a commutator out of a direct current system because it caused a lot of problems. Guess what? That's exactly what Tesla did years later, and we have alternating current. In other words,
Amazing.
he did not, you could not intimidate him, even at an early age. He knew he was right. He was convinced he was right. And most of the time he was.
So was he a solitary person, or did he have
Yes,
relationships?
very extremely solitary. As an example, for about 20 years, he lived in the penthouse built for him at the Waldorf Astoria in New York City. And even his dining table, when he was gone or not around, he demanded no one get near it, no one touch it. When he became famous, he would often eat at Delmonico's, a well-known restaurant then and still around. People would come from far and near to watch him eat. You know why? Because he was also, I guess today we call it a germaphobe, He had certain requirements before he ate and when he ate, and he would be chewing food and he would pause. And one day someone asked him, "Why do you do that?" And he said, "Oh, I'm calculating the mass of the food and specific gravity, things like that." He was always doing mental gymnastics, always challenging himself. But he was very solitary. He, mind you, he lived roughly 60 years in New York City, where he did the vast majority of his great work.
Well, Marko, too, before you leave the point, didn't he have symptoms of what we would call today OCD? And didn't he have rituals and napkins and all sorts of weird stuff when he was eating?
Yeah, he would require a stack when he ate of freshly laundered iron linen napkins. He would wipe down forks. He would wipe down the outside of an apple. Yes, he had very bizarre characteristics when it came to that. He had periods of tremendous wealth, especially 1888 when Westinghouse bought the first of the Tesla patents. He became very wealthy, but it didn't have any real meaning to him other than he did like to live the high life. He was a dapper Dan. Even in the laboratory, he would be dressed to the nines how he was. But he could afford to buy a house, live anywhere he wanted, and he never did. He lived in hotels his entire life because he could get privacy there. He could shut the door. I had some years ago at a lecture I was delivering, a very elderly man was there, and he said, "I knew Nikola Tesla."
Wow.
And I said, "In what capacity?" He said, "I'm a teenage boy and I worked for a messenger service. And we were always fighting who would bring a message to or take a message from Tesla." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Because he was a big tipper, even when he didn't have money." So one of the things you read about Tesla a lot is that he had this magnetism. And as Steve said, when he wanted to be a great salesman, although he said he never liked to do that, he was unbelievable. He stood 6'3", kind of lanky, steely blue eyes. And you read about when he would engage with you, his eyes, it was captivating. So I asked this elderly gentleman, was that your experience? And he said, yes. Said there was something he didn't want to leave his presence.
Wow. There are certain people like that, aren't there, that just have that aura, that magnetism, whatever it is.
Well, the old saying, Elvis left the building.
Yes, yes.
Kind of the same thing with Nikola Tesla. When he was at his zenith, he was a rock star. And people, even moneyed people, wanted to be around him. There was a movie years ago about Ty Cobb, and there was a scene in it. Tommy Lee Jones played Ty Cobb, and there was a scene in it where this young reporter kept trying to get near Ty Cobb, but at the same time, he wanted to write negative things about it. And Ty Cobb turned to him and said, "You know why you're sitting next to me in this taxi cab?" And the young reporter said, "No," he says, "because this is as close as you'll ever be to greatness." And Tesla understood that. And then he could play the demure, quiet individual. I was just skimming through some part of the book and ran across a piece we had in there about Tesla was at a party hosted for him by the Johnsons, whom Steve and I in the book call the Protectors. These were the people that introduced him very early on to high society. And this well-heeled elderly lady comes up to him, not knowing who he is, and says, because he liked to joke a lot too. As serious as he was, there was a practical jokester side of him that went back to his childhood. And she says, "Well, what do you do?" And his answer was, "Well, I dabble a little bit in electricity." That's all he said.
That's an understatement. What I'm fascinated too, Steve, by is the association between genius creativity and mania/hypomania is obvious, but how about the depressive periods for Tesla? How did that inform his work, or how did that impact him?
Well, of course, he never saw a psychiatrist. He was never diagnosed. It's always dangerous to make the diagnosis, but I did wade into that. He had several episodes during his life when he took to bed with a mysterious illness, and he couldn't get up and he couldn't function, and they thought he was going to die. cholera, it was an infection, it was this, it was that. And then all of a sudden he responded without treatment and just got better.
Yeah.
And so we take those periods as most likely of the major depressive episode. And then later in his life, he had some fairly unremitting, what we might call bipolar depression in the last decade or two of his life. Mostly spent his time not severely depressed, but, a little bit disgruntled. The life wasn't working out as well as he had wanted, but hadn't he been a little more hypomanic, he probably would have been, again, more successful. So his patents tended to be written during periods of hypomania. Didn't have, like I said, many pure manic episodes, but during hypomania, just like many creative people, they get a lot done. They don't need to sleep. They follow this energy. The ideas go flowing faster than they can influence them.
Yeah.
And that's when patents came. During the depressive times, of course, no patents.
Yeah. Well, his sleep habits were famous. Apparently, he chronically didn't need a lot of sleep. So maybe, like you said, he was chronically hypomanic, at least in the earlier days.
To just be a little more specific on what Steve just said, I would remind the audience that during that time, particularly from 1887 to 1891, in 1 year he was issued 14 U.S. patents and 2 British patents.
My goodness.
And then 12 patents again and 4 British patents in 89. That was that period that Steve was talking about.
Yeah.
Where he was just and
incredible.
he had a lot of patent wars. He was constantly, let me back up from that. When Steve and I wrote this book, one of the things we wanted to do was to give the reader Tesla as much as possible in his own words.
Mm-hmm.
Why? One, I think it's helpful to read or hear someone in their own words how they felt about certain things. But there was another reason that is kind of a little more personal to me that always impressed me, which was Tesla came from the Slavic world, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Russian language, Ukrainian language is spoken, and Serbian. If anyone's familiar with those languages, the transition to English is profound.
Yes.
There is no Latin basis to anything. And I was always impressed how fluent he was in the English language. In fact, how eloquent he was in explaining things in the English language. Mind you, he spoke 12 languages.
Wow.
So we wanted to give you in his own words, which would give you more insight into, how he worked. Although, as we all know, he didn't volunteer a lot of information.
But it sounds like
I want to add to that, Marko, because I should tell you, Andy, that when Marko brought his, his scholarship and his complete, really a lifetime of understanding Tesla to me as a friend and colleague, it was quite clear that almost everything we knew about Tesla, in particular the man, came from his own words. And so you could say, well, what right do you have to talk about Tesla's bipolar disorder if you never examine him? And the answer is that you have him as a historian telling you things, and you can make your own judgment. We try to quote as many of them as we can, but Tesla, in his own words, gave you what he was doing. And that's what you do in a psychiatric practice. You listen to a patient, they give you history. It's no difference. And he was so prolific that he gave us a lot of words.
If I might add to that, it's an excellent point, Steve, because what we know about Nikola Tesla is exactly what Steve said. What he said about Nikola Tesla. How is that possible? Well, no one knew who he was when he was in Europe. Very few people knew who he was when he first came here to that groundbreaking lecture. In 1919, mind you, he was born in 1856. He gave 6 interviews to the Electrical Experimenter magazine. That became his autobiography. No one ever wrote about him before because no one knew anything about him. So Steve is correct in saying we get it from the horse's mouth. Now, I would say one other thing when researching this book that we were very careful about. We would be going through and there'd be a reference to Tesla's book was called My Inventions. That was his autobiography. And we were looking something up, and we always wanted to check those references. And all of a sudden, you couldn't find anything. Then we realized that there are several versions of that autobiography because it's not copyright protected. Anybody can publish it. We began to notice little changes.
Oh, boy.
In how he would recall something. So we relied a lot on the electrical experimenter because that's the first time he said it.
Mm-hmm.
So
did he leave a vast written body of literature himself, or
no,
these
not
interviews?
at all. But I would say, if you read some of the depositions he gave, because he had this, legion of lawyers finding patents all the time.
Right.
If you read the depositions, which are usually not very readable, that's where you realize how eloquent and what a command of the English language he had.
I see. Yeah.
When you read those.
That is remarkable, actually.
It really is remarkable. One of the things that also pained Tesla, that affected him psychologically, two things actually that are on opposite ends of his life. One was the death of his brother, who was senior to him by a couple of years, who was the favorite in the family. Remember, I said it's a very patriarchal family. Firstborn males are first.
Yes,
it's just how it is.
Yes.
I can relate to that because I am in my family. So I have a large extended family.
Yes.
And so that he never shook that. And there's things attached to it that you'll read in the book, reasons why he never shook that. Some traumatizing things.
Yeah, so he had an insecurity from that.
Oh, there's no question,
stage.
because the family never thought he was going to succeed.
I see.
Yeah, Don had the older brother. He was the chosen one. And yet, in the end, we know the success of Tesla. So but it did trouble him. The second thing that bothered him was he fought for decades over who was the rightful owner, if you will, of the invention of the radio. Still to this day,
yes,
people think it's Marconi. In fact, the most prestigious award you can win from the National Association of Broadcasters is called a Marconi Award.
Marconi Award, exactly.
5 months after Tesla died, and it's in the book, we show you the header, and then there's a link. You can read the 85-page decision. It finally wound its way to the United States Supreme Court.
Oh, my.
And the United States Supreme Court ruled, stating, actually with one word, Tesla had primacy.
Wow.
Everyone who did anything, Tesla was first. In fact, when Marconi made his transmissions across the Atlantic, he used Tesla oscillators.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Tesla also, he never was vindicated in his own time and weighed heavily on it.
And Tesla also laid the groundwork for, or imagined, the idea of wireless communication, I understand.
Well, there's no question. In fact, he has a patent in 1920. In 1899, he spent about 8 months outside of New York in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Which has a special meaning for us at NEI. That's where we have our Congress every year.
Right. And he, as you read in the book, we open up the chapter with the landing of a rover on Mars. Mm-hmm. When he talked about Mars, everyone thought he was a quack. He was right.
He was absolutely right. That is
the parallels to the current person who's thinking about Mars and all things Tesla might give interest to the contemporary listening audience.
Yes.
The parallels between Elon Musk and Tesla go so deep that it's pretty amazing that no wonder they are, kind of confused with each other. I would like to read you a quote that Marko put me onto to tell you something that has to do with what is also a parallel to Elon Musk. So if I read this, you can think of Nikola and Tesla, but also think of if I were saying this and I were Elon Musk. So in a 1933 interview, Nikola Tesla was asked how it felt to be so far ahead of his time that he was subject to attacks upon his sanity. Obviously, a theme of the book.
Yeah.
Tesla replied that he long since ceased to regard it as important. He said, I live a life of seclusion. The opinion of the world does not affect me. I have placed as the real value in my life what follows after I'm dead, although it has been given to me to live to see those things which were once scouted, accepted as scientific dogmas. The thing that recompenses me is that my name shall be known to generations yet unborn for the Tesla coil, Tesla motor, and perhaps my name will be connected to the absolutely new source of power I'm about to present to the world. It is this thought in which I find happiness and health. A pioneer does not apply his energies in the way the world is going. Rather, he goes against the current. He lets them call him a lunatic. He lets them trample him. If I should ever tell you the inside story of how I had been trampled, but never mind, it was all good for me. I've come through it. I am able to work harder than I worked a year ago. I now work with greater energy and get results more easily than ever before in my life. And after all, they called me a lunatic before. What is one last time? Can't you imagine that applying to Elon Musk as much as Tesla?
In fact, to put a tag on that, they're building the Long Island, the Tesla, because at his last lab, Wardenclyffe, the Tesla Science Center, Elon Musk donated the first $1 million
Oh, wow. That's really remarkable.
to fund it.
Yeah. 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 It is incredible. It is incredible. The parallels. You're right. And of course, people speculated about Elon Musk's psychiatric condition, and he himself has mentioned that he may have autism or autism
Right.
spectrum
I
disorder.
actually seen him say it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, you know, when you talk about Tesla, someone used a word once to me. I was giving a lecture on him, and someone said to me, you know, some of what you're saying sounds kind of hyperbole.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, hyperbole and Nikola Tesla do not stand in the same room. I know what I'm saying sounds sometimes phantasmagorical, but he did every one of the things I said.
Right. Well, it ain't bragging if you can back it up.
He did it.
That's right. It ain't bragging if you can back it up.
Exactly.
Yeah. But you know, there is a certain autism. I'm not saying he has a diagnosis of autism, but that's why I asked you about the solitariness. There's an autistic quality to him, this inner world, this self-absorption almost.
No question. No question. When his lab, one of his main labs in 1895 in New York City, burned to the ground, there was part of a chalkboard that had survived. And in it were a few scribblings. This was reported by a reporter that we cite in the book. Couldn't make out what it was. But as you said, that lab gave this reporter the impression that it was some kind of like magician's chamber, something otherworldly. He would bring the glitterati of the world, all of whom wanted to be his friend, to his lab oftentimes. He was very well known for that. And he would give these demonstrations that even moderns today, you and I would look at if we were seeing it in real life going, that can't be. Remarkable. But it is, you know, and so he would engage these people. And his motive most of the time, honestly, was there may be some potential financial support here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the reason at the end, toward the end of his life, that J.P. Morgan pulled out his financial support is one day Tesla let it be known that he wanted to give energy to the world for free. Morgan said, not on my dime. Yeah.
No way. You know, I'm interested here. You're talking about how it seems that he has an introspection, but yet, as we were talking about earlier, Marko, coming from the Eastern European, Serbian tradition that you come from as well, talking about your emotions is completely discouraged. That is absolutely not part of the lexicon. So I'm wondering, he was not really self-analytical as far as his emotions. He wasn't maybe self-psychologically aware, but it sounds like he had an introspection and an awareness of how his mind worked.
Yes, he did understand. First of all, he accepted the fact that he was different. He talked about early on that he could hear the walking of a titmouse on a floor 3 rooms away, for instance. That he had this acuity of the sense that would torment him at times. It was, I think, we mentioned in the book, it was almost like psychological terrorism. These things would come after him, and they did all of his life, to be honest with you. It started early in childhood, age of 6 or 7. In fact, he mentions in his autobiography about an aunt to whom he was staying with and an uncle for a short period of time. And people in the area, in the villages, because it was very rural, would ask about him, and the aunt would say, "Oh, he's the crazy one." People thought he was nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. What did he say? What did he say about the way his mind worked? What revelations did he have about his mental processes?
Like Steve even mentioned, that he had the difficulty, in fact, most of the time he couldn't, between genius ideas and these grandiose delusions. He understood this. He let it run free because, as you and I would think would do the same thing, I mean, it was a garden full of, fruit and vegetables that he could pluck from a tree. He would almost do it on command. The spigot would just run wild. He did have the issue of distinguishing, but so many times he was right. Any human being after a period of time would understand, hey, you know what, I'm going to go with that because I'm kind of, usually right. And so it was in the latter years that Steve mentioned, from about the age of 72, 73, every year he would make pronouncements, and all of the, journalists in New York City would show up. They would do it for two reasons. One, they knew they would always get a fantastic quote out of him. And two, people were frankly still interested. This guy seems off the wall at this age, so late in his life, that he may come up with something again that would benefit everyone. Listen, let's be honest. He did more to benefit society than anyone else. He just did. I know that some people balk at that, and I challenge them, name me somebody else. Just that simple.
One thing you brought up here, and it struck a memory with me, Marko, and that, you were asking, was he manic when he had his ideas? Could he tell the difference? And that's you remember how he would at times need to try to harness himself, and he realized that he was reaching the end about what he do, and he'd chant, and he'd say, I need to lift the burden of mankind, I need to lift the burden of mankind, and use chanting and internal kinds of things to try to calm himself down, bring him back from the edge of losing it, wasn't he?
Excellent point. In fact, one of the questions you had here was to describe the moment that he had his boom moment. And it took place in Budapest, 1882. He was there at the telegraph company waiting to get a job at the soon-to-be finished telephone company. So he was working there, fixing all their problems. By the way, while fixing their problems, he invented the loudspeaker that he never patented.
My goodness.
Yeah. He said, I got to fix this. So he invented it to fix it. Anyway, one day it was February, very cold, and he's walking with his companion, kind of his aide, a gentleman named Anton Szigeti, whom he trusted, and they were confidants. So picture this. There's hoarfrost still on the trees in the park. He's walking, this lanky 6'3" Serbian, and he's quoting Faust in German. Very much like what Steve said. It was this chant. Then he stopped. He turned to Anton and said, give me a stick. And Anton thought, what are you joking? What do you mean give you a stick? He didn't give him a stick. Tesla insisted. Anton said, Nikola, sit down. Let's relax for a minute. He thought that there was some other crazy episode of Tesla's that he had witnessed before. Finally, Tesla was so insistent that Anton gave him a stick, broke it from a tree.
Mm-hmm.
Tesla leaned over, and in the wet earth, inscribed a series of diagrams that 6 years later, he would show before the American Institute of Electrical Engineers in New York City. That, my friends, was alternating current.
Wow, that's
It had
incredible.
come to him. He even
Incredible.
said, I know what's going to come to me. I know
Yeah.
what's going to happen. Boom, right there. It all coalesced.
Right. Now, is that what he meant when he said pure instinct?
Yes, he believed that something was governing him more than just the learned aspect of his life. He believed, and we've already discussed this, he believed he was here for a different purpose. In fact, he was asked, why not marry whatever? He said, my remuneration is of a much higher order. And that's that lift the burdens from the shoulders of mankind. I mean, we're all so fortunate to have had somebody like
That's
that,
true. That is true.
devoted his entire, mind you, he lived, and this is ironic, in the Orthodox world, we use the Julian calendar. Our Christmas is January 7th.
Mm-hmm.
He died on January 7th.
My goodness. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
In
amazing.
a small suite of rooms at the New Yorker Hotel, having, I guess financially, you could say, fallen from grace, where he
Yep.
lived at the Waldorf Astoria.
Right. Now, he actually moved a couple of times
Yes.
from hotels. There were financial problems, but also he got a little weird, I understand.
Oh, no.
He got almost paranoid and weird and obsessive.
Yeah, no, especially that probably the last decade. It's
What
75th.
about the pigeons?
Exactly. That's what I'm referring to. Tell me
Well,
that story.
Here's an individual who was so fastidious, a germaphobe, and yet he would commune with pigeons. In fact, there was a famous scene we talk about in the book where he is being feted by the most famous scientists in the world, aside from Tesla. It was a 3-day soiree in New York City. And it's where one of his confidants, a scientist, B.A. Barron, who was the one heading the committee that year to give the Edison Medal to Tesla.
Oh, my God, that's
the
funny.
Edison Medal.
That's funny.
Tesla's response to the request was, you do not honor Tesla by Tesla accepting the Edison Medal. You honor Edison by Tesla accepting it. I refuse it.
Good for him.
Ultimately, he acquiesced and said, okay, I'm going to show up. In fact, I have a photograph. There was an actual photograph taken. Tesla and all these famous people. Lord Kelvin came from England.
Wow.
Steinmetz was there. All these other great scientists. And Tesla comes up before the crowd to accept the medal. And you, Andy, had asked about, how did he deal with kind of who he was. And like I said, he understood his abilities. He stands up before this august body and says, this award comes many years too late. For I remind you, while all of you seek to adore my body, should I strut like a peacock, without me, you have no reason to exist.
Oh, my goodness.
It's that talk the talk, walk the walk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
People would mistake that for arrogance.
no, right. You're right. That wasn't his nature, mind you.
Yeah.
He that was a rare moment. But when he would be pushed to the wall, then he would spring back like a viper verbally, because he had these verbal skills.
Yes.
It's not something he did all the time, but he had enough. He had been maligned by so many people. When he gave the initial at Columbia, what would become Columbia University, in May of 1888, no one knew who he was. You have all these famous scientists sitting in the audience. After he gave his demonstration, and as Steve said, Tesla always said, I don't like to do that. But when he got up on the stage, he was a showman. And after that, scientists sitting in the audience going, okay, might as well get a paper route. I mean, it was just, he diminished everybody else because everything was so far ahead of everyone else, what they were doing.
Right, but he wasn't doing it to put people down.
No,
to
that's
show
my
off.
point. Not at all. Not at
Yeah.
all. That wasn't, he didn't care about that. But
Yeah.
that particular instance, when he got the award, that he had enough. Because listen, Lord Kelvin was one of his most outspoken detractors. We have a quote in the book where Lord Kelvin ends up saying, I was wrong.
Mm.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, it's incredible the cocksureness of Tesla to be so convinced that he was right and so cocksure about it, I guess, that he could withstand, because obviously the others were jealous and others, of course, are going to try to take him down.
The jealousy never stopped. It never stopped. There's a whole story we have in the book about, as the famous Battle of the Currents was going on, how and why the electric chair was developed. And it was developed to show the deadliness of alternating current.
Oh, my goodness. Isn't that something?
But the point was, they didn't understand at the time how it worked until he showed them all the mistakes they made. People think that it's volts that kill you. It's not volts that kill you. The cover of the book, that photograph was taken in 1899 in Colorado Springs. In fact, we talk about that. It's a very unique photo. It's the most famous photo ever taken of Tesla. You're looking at 100 million volts out of the Tesla coil. He did a demonstration where he grabbed, so to speak, the hot wire to demonstrate to Edison, who said, alternating current will kill you, enough volts. And Tesla said, well, Mr. Edison, I'm still alive. It's resistance that kills you. Now,
that is a real picture, the cover of your book? I'm looking at it now.
Oh, no, that's a real picture.
Oh, my gosh. That is fantastic.
It's worth reading in the book. That's not just a photograph. It's how that photograph was taken. You must read that because you'll be flabbergasted. And also, this is 1899.
Yeah, it's incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Well, Marko, tell them, we're kind of throwing it out, but tell them the story of why the FBI raided his apartment when he died.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, not only the FBI, but the custodian of alien properties went into his small suite of rooms and confiscated everything, most of which is still under lock and key by the U.S. government and its various agencies, Department of Energy, Department of Defense, because they were looking for what Tesla, he didn't like the title, but it was referred to at the time as the death ray. And no one knows what happened to all those papers, except they've never seen the light of day. I will tell you, many years ago, I did a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act search, early on when the public could avail themselves of that opportunity. And I get a letter. I still have the box. In fact, I'm looking at it right now. It came to me from the FBI.
Oh, my.
It took 2 years. So
goodness.
To demonstrate the things that are still kept secret about Tesla, after about a year, because I was told it would take 2 years, I call up, and I guess I just lucked out, but a gentleman, one of the researchers at the FBI, picks up the phone, and he asked me whom I'm inquiring about. And I said, well, I put in a request about a year ago for information on Tesla. And he does this kind of, like just releasing exhaustion air. And I go, did I say something wrong? And he goes, no. He said, we've been working on the Tesla stuff for decades. We're not even close to finish. He said, I will tell you, when you receive information from us, it will be heavily redacted.
Wow.
So I've got letters where Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a friend of Tesla's, writing him, and you could see a few pronouns, and that's about it. Yeah, they sent me probably 300 documents.
So his ideas were considered dangerous?
Oh, no question.
Wow.
No question.
So you can
Wasn't
literally...
it the basis of the Star Wars shield
No
that we didn't
question.
put in place, and then actually we're using today in the Ukraine war to help Russian missiles out of the
Exactly.
skies?
I had said earlier that Tesla died January 7th, 1940. He had an appointment at the White House on January 8th, the next day,
Wow.
to meet with the president. And he wanted to give a gift, so to speak, to the country for allowing him to do what he did. That's Star Wars.
Wow.
In the U.S. military today, it's still referred to as Project Nick,
Wow.
which is
After
an
Nick.
anglicization of Nikola.
Yeah.
That was kind of his gift to, and he was anti-war, he was peace, he was everything, but he so valued America. That's why he developed some of these weapons of war. That's not the only one. You know, there's still the issue out there about radar.
Mm-hmm.
That he was the first to come up with radar, and he talked about it. How he said you can see a ship without really seeing it. For instance, it was
Wow.
going to be purchased by the Navy. And then there was a lot of people, this harkens back, Andy, to what you said early on about coming from another country. They felt that because he came from Eastern Europe, that was mostly Germanic,
Yes.
that he was, I don't know, he was an enemy of America,
Right. Not to be trusted.
not to be trusted. You're
Not
correct.
sufficiently patriotic.
Right,
That's
not
what
to-
gets leveled
no-
at you.
Right. And no one was more patriotic than him.
Yes, exactly. So radar was Tesla's idea too? I have to tell you, that's
Not only
remarkable.
that, there's a chapter in the book, later in the book, where we talk about development of the X-ray.
Mhm.
The credit is given to Röntgen.
Yes.
There's an actual photograph that exists of Tesla taking an X-ray of his own hand. He sends his example to Röntgen,
Oh, come on.
and Röntgen says, "How'd you do this?"
Oh, my goodness.
I'd like to emphasize, you know, as we come to a close, that
Yeah.
this book has about 1,100 citations. So
Incredible.
everything we talk about in this book is backed up.
Yeah, speaking of which, we said this when we were talking before we went on the air here, that there have been many books written, many biographies and books written about Tesla.
Right. I have them all.
Yeah.
No,
So-
literally, I do.
Yeah.
I went back. I even used services. There's a couple of services online that can get you know, really old books. We were quibbling about what Tesla was paid for his early patents by Westinghouse.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers are all over the place.
Mm.
But there was a society that was involved in the sale of this. And I thought to myself, if anyone's going to have the right numbers, it's going to be the people that were there. So Harvard published a book in 1889, which I purchased, that has all the real numbers. And
That's
that's
amazing.
how the book was written. We
Yeah.
left no stone unturned.
Well, that's part of what I'm asking. You know, how is your book different? What is the perspective you're bringing here that's different?
Well, it differs in what we've already talked about. I have which they call today the lived experience. I've lived in Yugoslavia.
Mhm.
Okay, what was called at the time I was there, it was
Right.
called Yugoslavia. So
Right.
when he gives you those examples, he talked about, for instance, one time why it's so rugged there and all the rocks on the trails and stuff. You can ask me about them because when I'm a runner, I'd run on those trails, I'd hit a rock and I'd go down. So
Yeah.
I know exactly what he was talking about
At a very granular level, yes.
at a very granular level. Also, Steve, you know, and his background brings an
course.
analysis that
Yes.
other authors just can't do. They don't have
Right.
the expertise. They don't have
Yes.
the education. They don't
Yes.
have the background.
Yes.
So it was the two of us, kind of happenstance in a way, that came together to write this book. We're very proud of it. And
Well,
we tried to write it also so it was a historical narrative that was very readable, yet scholars could refer to it.
yeah.
In the book, we have multiple appendices listing all of our sources.
Yes. Well,
And-
let's go into the origin story. How was it that the two of you got together and decided to write this book? Our audience, of course, knows Dr. Stahl and is fascinated by him, but how did the two of you come together?
Well, I live up
do
at a
this?
mountain resort, and Steve used to have a beautiful home near, and we actually met, oddly enough, one day we're at I'll just say it, we're at the local yacht club. We ended up sailing together.
Oh, that's great.
And then it kind of started from there. So it was kind
Marko, being a little modest, he was actually my muse. He was the editor who guided me through the first novel that I wrote and helped me tremendously. And he's well connected to the literary, but also to the Hollywood community.
Yes.
And, so he had all these connections and a lifelong community and lecturing a lot the Tesla. So we just put our heads together and come up with something.
It happened at looking over at the lake in a coffee shop. It was just kind of very innocently started that way.
Well, that's how the best ideas happen.
Yeah. We're very proud of the book.
Now, my question for each of you is, besides what's the main message you want readers to take away, but is this ultimately a book or a story about a man with psychiatric problems, or is this about a genius and the inventions and the creativity? How should we think about it?
Excellent question. And I can answer it in one word from my side. Both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Also, we hope that there will be people out there who read this book who nobody has any idea about Tesla's mental challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
We hope that people will read this and go, look what he accomplished. And if they're challenged that way mentally, not to use it as an excuse, but rather use it to inspire themselves and be inspired by what Tesla did.
Wow. That is a wonderful, hopeful message. Steve, what would you say?
I can't end on a better note than that. I think it was a texture to who he was. It continues the age-long debate about what is the role of creativity in bipolar disorder. It was a complement of who he was. But really, one should take from this that if you have patients, as many listening here are treating, or other people who might be listening having these disorders, they could take heart. Some of the most creative and important people who have given the most on earth have been, associated or even have a bit of this illness. So it's a very hopeful kind of message.
Yeah, I love it. Well, we are out of time, unfortunately. There's so much more I want to hear. Marko, you're an excellent storyteller. I could listen to you regale us with stories for a lot longer.
Thank you. Well, when you talk about Tesla, it's not too difficult.
Yeah, that's true. Interesting subject matter. So I want to thank everybody for listening. Please go out and pick up this book. I have not read it yet. I'll be honest. I haven't had it available to me. I can't wait to get my hands on it. And Steve, thanks so much for your contribution here as well. And hopefully we'll be hearing more from you guys. Are you guys going to be taking this show out on the road? Or are you going to be?
Yeah, we're waiting to learn from the publisher what the promotional department's got set up. In fact, I was going to communicate with them today.
Great. Well, hopefully our audience will come out and support you and hear more what you have to say. And please, for more of our podcasts, there's many more in this psychopharmacology series, and there's many other NEI podcasts. And you can get those wherever you get your podcasts, or you can go to our website, www.neiglobal.com. That's neiglobal.com for more information. And we look forward to our next installments. Marko and Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the NEI Podcast. Please let us know what you'd like to hear more about by leaving a review. Don't miss another episode. Subscribe today.